interviewing my great-grandpa Moe, Art Moe. He was a missionary in Japan for a while. He's going to be talking about his feedback, and he's going to be talking about the missionary life, his conversion, and all those different things. So, great-grandpa, I wanted to first ask you, what kind of home did you grow up in?
I grew up in a non-Christian home for my first number of teen years. I have two memories of my mother. One when she waved from the second floor window of a hospital at my brother and I playing in the yard down below. She may have said something or called out something, but I have no memory of her at all speaking. And so that lack of motherly care, she was, as far as I know, not a Christian. My dad was, and he was a sailor at the end of World War I. And when he was discharged, the Navy said, "You men have done well in your service. We're going to reward you by giving you a job in the civil service as U.S. government service. And Mr. Moe, we're sending you to Sumas, Washington." Where's that? Well, that's an important white spot in the road. And I got to tell you why he was assigned to the U.S. Customs to inspect goods coming from the Orient. Well, you would think that the Chinese and Japanese toy makers would send things to the country where they were going to be sold. That's not the way it worked. Because the Japanese and Chinese toy makers soon discovered it was more expensive to send things to a port in the U.S., like Seattle, Washington, which was a big port 100 miles from where I was born and raised. And so the secret was the American longshoremen wanted more money than the Canadians did. So those smart Japanese and Chinese manufacturers will send them to Vancouver, where it's much cheaper. So all Christmas toys and decorations, not all, but some, were sent to Vancouver, unloaded there for less money, thank you, and then put on a railroad car, sent the train 100 miles, no, not 28 miles to the east, made a right turn, went 1 mile to the U.S. border, and entered the U.S. at my customs checkpoint for things coming from the Orient, because it was cheaper. And so my dad thought, we better give these people good service. And so he worked hard in the U.S. Customs, went right to the top as the head of the department. Oh, I love my dad in his uniform, the wool buttons down here. U.S. Customs officer. So I have a loving father who is very busy and very well respected for his honesty and fair dealing and for his complete care in seeing that everything was done legally and properly. So they sent him to Sumas, Washington, white spot in the road, and he liked to climb. And that part of Washington State had lots of mountains, had seashore, islands, Skullcap Peak, very beautiful area. And then the land stretching away from the border was wonderful dairy country. So I was raised in dairy country. And boy, do I like ice cream. So I was raised in a small town. Way back then, the town of Sumas was 700 people. Today, it is 700 people. Nice little border town. And my dad has many funny stories of people trying to smuggle things from Canada into the U.S. Now, that's similar, but on a much smaller scale. You will be surprised, perhaps, to know what was the most profitable thing to smuggle. People. They were smuggling Chinese across the border into the U.S. because the Chinese had enough money to pay the smugglers, and we had a border patrol to try to catch them, but that was not always successful. And our dad came into that situation, and he did very good financially. So like I said, he went right to the top of the organization. Worked for the government, so there was no depression that affected him. He had a good salary, and we were fortunate, he was fortunate to hear of a nice piece of property on a hill that overlooked the town. So I was raised up on the hill, special position. But went to school, had a great school in town, and then got on the school bus. And we drove about 3.5 miles out into the country to the high school. Graduated from Brooksack Middle High School. So, the town was known as the gateway into the Caribou, which was the route up into Alaska and the gold fields. So, talk about gold was a popular subject. And my grandfather now, this is my mother's dad, he was mayor of the town and could take time off. And so he decided, let's get a couple of pals and go looking for gold up in the mountain. And he did. And there were traces of gold in the streams running down from the mountains. So they knew there must be gold up there somewhere. But the trick is to find it. And so these three men went up and climbed up one small mountain and said, let's camp here. And this mountain over here, there are streams going down that have just a trace of gold. So if we go around the mountain, climb up a bit, maybe we'll find the mother lode. So they did that. They didn't find any gold. So they did in other places, and there were a couple of good gold lodes that paid off. One mine, about 20 years after it was first discovered, was sold for $385,000. But my granddad didn't get but 1/3 of that because the three partners shared. So none of the gold came out that we or my brother. But I was raised with a housekeeper that fed us, clothed us. My dad was busy and at the U.S. Customs, working for the government. Like I said, he went right straight up to the top of the organization. And I was a Moe. And my father was the head of the customs. And he's got a uniform with gold buttons. So that's my background. But something very badly happened to me when I was 16 years old. There was a Methodist church in town, and we attended once in a while. And when my dad married, a number of years after my mother died, they took my brother and I to Sunday school. And this was a Methodist church that still believed in salvation. And so, ever so often, they would have an evangelist come and preach Sunday evening, maybe Sunday morning too. So, one Sunday evening, when I was 16, we had gone to church, my brother and I, and the pastor came up to me, like you would, I'm sure. And he said to me, Arthur, wouldn't you like to become a Christian? You know what I did? I broke out crying and running down to the altar in front. And I gave my heart and life to Jesus Christ when I was 16 years old. And it really took. That's the greatest thing that can happen to anybody, young or old, receiving Jesus as your personal Lord and Savior.
Grandpa Moe, I have to ask you, before your conversion at 16, were there any previous effects or people that helped you on your journey that kind of pushed you along that direction? Or was it just very rapid and quick?
Not especially, but later on, when my dad married again, he married a Christian lady, and she influenced him and me and my brother, yes. But it was hearing the gospel preached in church. And I knew I was a sinner. Yeah. And that Jesus truly forgave and made me his child. I had no doubt about that. Well, World War II was on. And then I got that right, yeah. And so when I turned 18, The war was still on. It was ending down. In fact, it had pretty much been won in Europe, but not in Japan, the Pacific. I volunteered, signed up in the Navy, and went to San Diego and trained there as a radar operator. Oh boy, that was a new toy. You could see ships coming in and airplanes flying over by the radars. And I thought that was great. And graduated from radar operator school. And then they put me on a ship and we crossed the Pacific on an LST. Now that was a special amphibious tank and truck and jeep carrier. And, you know, they were a wonder because the bow doors opened up, the ramp went down, and the tanks and the trucks could go right out of the beach. And so we thought we were really special, and indeed we were, if the enemy wasn't shooting. So, I was a Christian in the Navy, and we traveled fast as the LST would go. You know how fast an LST travels? Slang speed is 8 miles an hour. Well, anyway. So that was my first introduction to Japanese people. And our ship was tied up to a dock. And the Navy would supply their ships in ports. They'd have warehouses, and you would order in food supplies and particularly ice cream powder. Our ship, an LST, low end of the ranking, you know, had its own ice cream. So, good Lord was looking after me. Because I love ice cream. So, came back, was discharged, went to a Christian Bible school in Seattle, Washington. Seattle Pacific College, it's called. Real good, because that's where I met my wife. So, we were married and pastored a little church that was dying. I don't think he contributed to that because our attendance increased. We had 2 families, 3 grandmothers, and an occasional couple that was in the military that would come. And nobody got chased away. So Lord bless. And it was to get experience before going to the mission field. And that gave that to us. And we went to Japan on a slow boat. This was a pleasure. And it, I think, probably went around 15 miles an hour. Which was much better. So, we got our practical experience and had our first son. And by the way, I had 5 boys. And Japanese thought this was wonderful. And I had a neighbor man come up to me and said, "Oh, son, if I become a Christian, will I have boys only too?" That didn't go with me. So anyway, by the way, son number 2 is my son Ron, and I'm proud of him. He's a missionary doing a very special job. And so my career was as a missionary in Japan, working mostly with the gospel radio ministry that broadcast shortwave from the Philippines, from Japan, and from Guam, gospel radio program. And I worked there 22 years or so. And they said, Mo-san, san means Mr. Miss, whatever. And they said, Mo-san, you speak Japanese well, and you always have something to talk about. We need some help with a small radio program to fill in between 30-minute programs, which were 27 or so. Would you like to do something there? Yes. Well, okay, you can have your own program. You know how long my program was? 3 minutes. Well, so much for a big career. When you're a Christian, you do what the Lord asks you to do.
Yes.
And you do it as to please Him. So, interestingly, you discover what your spiritual gift is when you give yourself to the Lord, because the Lord grows you and develops you to serve Him, what His will is. And I'm not a preacher, right? I'm the type that makes friends with Japanese or anybody that is alone. I notice it. So that's a good privilege. And you never know what the power of gospel radio is. Who's listening? And I knew that my program and the other radio gospel programs were heard all over Japan from the 3 stations that were broadcasting shortwave. Christian radio work is important, and I was privileged to be part of that, and making friends, especially with the listeners. And I was greatly surprised once. A church down in Kyoto, that was about 200 miles away from Tokyo to the south, and they invited me to come down and speak to some people that they were invited. So I did that, and I got down there on the train early, and Kyoto is an ancient capital city full of Japanese shrines and temples. An ancient capital city, very interesting to see and to learn about the history of Japan, because of the samurai warlord who ruled the nation in the name of the emperor. And the emperor in Japan, you got to understand, as a missionary, the culture and who's top dog, that's not a term, who's the head person in the society. In Japan, it's the emperor. He's almost a god. In fact, when the war ended and the American occupation took place in Japan, they politely asked the emperor to to make a public statement, I am not a god. And he did it. Interesting now, we treated the Japanese, but we did it fairly and gently, and they let us for it. When we first went to Japan, my wife and I lived up here socially and economically. We received a salary, not a big salary, but enough to take care of us and do it well. So we were down here economically and socially when we first arrived. Now, missionaries are up here, and we wish we could live like that. But no need for that. The Lord meets our needs. And that's the one lesson that my wife and I learned in the years that we spent in Japan. And he does it today. Meets my needs. And so I'm well taken care of and fed well, have Christian care, October here on it. And it's just something I think the Lord is grateful for. Now, you got some questions on top of
Yeah.
Yeah. You're right.
I've got my list of questions. Yeah. I was wondering, after the 22, 23 years you spent in Japan, what caused you to come back from that?
Turned 65.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you return because of your own choice, or was it because of the missionary society?
Yeah, that was when you became 65. You could go on Social Security, which is what we did. We didn't have to depend upon people like you supporting us. We said, if you feel you should, fine, we'll put that money to good work, but it won't come to us. And pray for us and the friends that we're making live radio, and bless the radio evangelism work of Japan. Okay, now more questions, maybe some from you.
I think one more thing is, after you came back from Japan, what other things did you do when you were on Social Security? Other kind of different work that you did in the States?
I didn't have any, don't have any special work that I do here, except friendship evangelism. So, questions from you?
How did you decide to go to Japan, and was your wife Bev on board with that?
Okay. Now, I'll tell you about my missionary calling. And right to begin with, I want to warn you, my missionary call was very unique, very unusual. And I like to say, because this guy is a stubborn young Norwegian, God had to make it very plain. And so, it was as if I heard God's voice say, Arthur actually, I want you to go back to Japan as a missionary. And I said, yes, Lord, I'll do it. So, I went to a Christian college, trained to be missionary, studied Japanese in college, and so I went to the field knowing beginning Japanese. Japanese is a tough language. They have 2 alphabets, 40 or so symbols, plus 2,000 Chinese symbols you need to know if you're going to read a newspaper. So, being a missionary, number one difficult, I shouldn't say trial, but it's an uphill climb, is to learn the language. And Japanese is one of the tough ones. Okay, yes.
Can you say something in Japanese?
Okay. I'm going to stand here and say good morning to you. I stand because that's important to you to see what I do, not only what I say. Ohio gozaimasu. Now that's a vowel. Thank you also is a vowel. And if you don't follow the Japanese custom, you're going to say, he's so proud. He's so American. He's not really interested in me. So we learn from the vowels. Thank you. Good morning. Good night. Sayonara. You probably all know that word.
Yes.
Goodbye. Okay, more questions? Yes.
Was there ever a time when you were in Japan that you thought about giving up and coming home?
I'm sorry. Say that again.
She asked, was there ever a time in Japan when you felt like giving up and going home?
No, not that. There were times that were difficult. My wife, she suffered a number of illnesses, but Japan has good hospitals. We were blessed to have good doctors. Japanese doctors, most of them were trained in the U.S. The Seventh-day Adventists have a wonderful medical work on the mission field, and they did it in Japan. So, some of our boys were born here in the hospital in Tokyo.
Yeah, I wanted to ask.
There's not,
Yeah, I wanted to ask, when you were, you said you were going to seminary at one point.
Bible school.
Bible school. Yeah. What made you decide to go to Bible school?
Well, because my father worked in the customs in this border town, and in the room next to him was a man who was on the board of Seattle Pacific College, and he recommended it and told us about it. We went and saw the campus. Good school. Got no questions.
How do you think the Bible college experience impacted how you followed God and evangelized in Japan?
Well, in Japan, the Japanese respect education, being educated, and having a degree. And so that was one of the main reasons. But if you're going to be a missionary, you're most likely going to be involved in teaching or answering a lot of questions. And so That's one reason I went to college. And because that man next door at the customs office urged my father to urge me. My brother and I both went to South college.
Someone back here, have a question? Yes.
Yeah, just wondering about your children. Where did they go to school, and how did that missionary experience affect them?
You're asking how, well, did my children go to school?
Yeah, where did they go to school, and how did the missionary experience affect the kids?
Most missionaries and their organization started a Christian school for their children. And Ron here graduated from Christian Academy in Japan. I was privileged to help a little bit. I didn't really found it or anything, but my wife and I bought a piece of property a mile away from the school, so the boys could go to school on their bicycles. I had to take 3 commuter trains to get to work. So Dad traveled by train, and the trains in Japan all came with the passengers already built in. You may laugh, but I had this experience. Yeah. And so, more questions?
Were there any hobbies that you have or had?
Well, you can imagine that one of my hobbies is collecting Japanese postage stamps. And I have a complete connection for all of the stamps that were issued and used during the time that I was in Japan. It's buried somewhere in the boxes in my room there, the Christian care. Japanese postage stamps are indeed very interesting, informative, and beautiful.
Just want to ask you, do you have any funny or awkward moments interacting with Japanese people? And how do they receive that? Any funny or awkward moments?
I had no problem at all.
No problem. Fit right in, huh?
Okay. They had no problem because I treated them with respect and understanding. And I wore, particularly during the first year, a nice warm black coat. It was my Navy pea jacket. And I bowed to them, they bowed back to me. I spoke Japanese to them kindly, and glad to meet you, glad to get to know you. And that's absolutely necessary for missionary work in any country. And your attitude must never be superior me, natives, something like that. No. Japanese culture in many ways is higher and better than the American one. They have a longer history, and some of the buildings that they built, largest wooden building in the world, giant statue of Buddha in the largest building, wooden building. Great Buddha in Kamakura moved up to him. go pay 100 yen, go in a little door inside that Buddha, and he's empty. So, okay.
Another question I wanted to ask was with the missionary organization you were working with, how was, did that present any challenges or incredible benefits that made it very different than if you would have been alone?
Well, there was a great benefit because my mission to begin with called Far Eastern Gospel Crusade. Later on, they changed it to Send International to be more modern in name. And the word crusade in the Orient, particularly in Muslim countries, is bad connotation. And so we dropped that and it became known as Send International.
Were there any people you worked with that you think were very significant in the way you evangelized your work?
I was fortunate with my interest in radio and being assigned to a gospel radio program producer organization to get to know our radio speaker. Akira Hattori is his name. He was a graduate of seminary here in the States, spoke perfect English, and it was a real privilege to get to know him and to work for him. To tell you the story, he was the man in charge of our gospel radio ministry, and as the man in charge, ever so often, he was expected to write a letter in English, and we would send it to prayer partners in America here. And he said to me one day, "Mo-san, I need some help in my letters. I tell you what, I'll write the first copy of the letter and put in the mistakes, and then you correct me." So I was his helper that way. And dear man.
How was the weather? Did were there any earthquakes while you were there? Earthquakes.
Earthquakes. Japan has 6 earthquakes a day that can be felt. Now, that may be only a couple of shakes, but they have some big ones, and those are deadly. They build their homes with interlocking wood corners so the house will not fall apart in an earthquake. Buildings that are concrete or brick, look out if it's a very, very strong earthquake, because those fragile buildings will collapse, and that has happened. And fortunately, we didn't have any much.
What's an example of what you would talk about on your 3-minute radio show?
Well, I want to remember this one because it was one of the first. In 3 minutes, I talked about the Bible word fellowship. And I said, now, this is just a humorous explanation. The fellowship is when there are some fellows in the ship. And they laughed at that one too. They thought that was funny. I gave them the real explanation, of course. Yeah.
Michael, what was your first year in Japan as a missionary?
55 in the fall.
52.
1952.
After the war, while you were there, did you ever feel any danger or animosity from the people, being American?
Let's see, what year did the war end?
45.
45. Okay, so it must have been. Ron, can you help me on that one?
Yeah, the war ended when Japan surrendered.
Yes.
52, Grandpa.
57?
52!
52?
52!
Okay.
Say your question again, Bob.
While you were there after the war as a missionary, being American, did you ever feel any danger or animosity from the people?
No. None at all.
I did.
Yeah.
This is her.
Yeah, Ron says he did.
What?
Ron says that he did.
When we rode our bikes.
Was that for Japanese?
Yeah, in Japan, when we rode our bikes in school, there was a temple or something.
Oh, yeah.
There was an older man who had
No, I was.
obviously been hurt in the war and recovered from facing scars and whatever. And he had a cane. He hobbled out and tried to hit us. I don't feel animosity toward him. That's not to go fight or let. But I felt sorry for his wounded in the war. And that was why he treated us that way. But other than that, I never had any animosity toward me. The Japanese responded, if they responded well to the occupation. The occupation. I had their copy folks.
Alright. Looks like we're about to close up. Is there anything?
Do you still know people in Japan and talk to them?
No.
Okay.
Been gone too long.
Did Grandpa end with John 3:16 in Japanese?
Okay. My mother was asking if you can end with John 3:16 in Japanese.
I can do the first part. Kami wa sono shitori go tamamata horo ni toni o aishite kudasatta. And that's only the first phrase.
Wow.
It takes many more phrases to say the same thing in Japanese as it does in English. It's the way the language is love.
Final thing before we leave, just let everybody know. Art and Bev wrote 2 books, and they are in the church library if you want to know more, a little more detail about their lives and so forth. So, sure, check those out.
I'm rereading those books right now. We told it like it was.